At the end of a street, where the asphalt gave way to a small dirt path, there was a wooden bench. It had been there for so long that most people no longer truly saw it. They passed it by as if it were part of the landscape, like a tree or a stone. But the bench was not well. The wood, once smooth and welcoming, was now gray and rough, riddled with small splinters and cracks. One of the slats on the seat was loose at one end, hanging slightly downward. Velvety green moss grew in the crevices and on the bench's feet where the night's dampness would gather. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. It was the end of an autumn afternoon. The sun, low in the sky, cast a long golden light over everything. The shadows of the houses stretched across the street. A man was walking slowly, heading home. He always passed by that bench. On that day, for some reason, he stopped. His gaze settled on the loose slat. A gentle wind blew, and the slat moved a little, making a dry, low sound, a tired little click. It was a small sound, almost imperceptible, but it seemed to break the silence of the street. The bench looked sad, forgotten. A place that had been made for rest now offered only discomfort and neglect. He stood there, motionless, for a full minute. He thought of the times he had seen people sitting there years ago, an elderly couple who read the morning paper, children who used it as a base for their games. Now no one sat there anymore. The bench had lost its function, its purpose. It was just growing old, slowly coming apart. The image of that loose slat swaying in the wind stayed in his mind. It was a small imbalance, a detail out of place that represented all the neglect. In that moment, a simple, clear decision formed. It wasn't a grand thought, but a quiet certainty. Tomorrow, he would take care of that bench. He turned and continued on his way home, but now with a plan taking shape. The promise of transformation was already present. He pictured the bench not as it was, but as it could be, with the wood smooth again, strong, with a warm, vibrant color. A place where someone could sit to watch the sunset, or to simply take a deep breath for a moment. The idea of restoring that small piece at the end of the street brought him a sense of calm and purpose. It wasn't an urgent or important task for the world, but it felt right.
By the time he got home, the daylight was already fading. He went into his small workshop at the back of the yard. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil hung in the air. It was a familiar scent of work and patience. He didn't turn on the main light, letting the soft twilight filter in through the window. He looked at his tools hanging on the wall, each in its place: a stiff bristled brush, sandpaper of different grits, a small jar of new screws. He picked up the stiff bristled brush, feeling the weight of the wooden handle and the stiffness of the bristles with his thumb. Then he took a pair of work gloves, thick and worn from use. He placed everything in a canvas box, along with an empty cloth bag. He was preparing for the first step, the cleaning. There was no hurry. The work would begin with the morning sun. He closed the workshop door, feeling the tranquility of the approaching night and the certainty of what he would do the next day. The bench at the end of the street would no longer be forgotten.
The morning arrived with a clear, crisp light. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth from the morning dew. After a cup of hot coffee, he picked up the canvas box he had prepared the night before and left the house. The street was silent. Only the sound of his footsteps on the asphalt and the distant song of a bird broke the calm. He walked slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the box in his hand. The sun was still low, and its light created long blue shadows on the ground. When he reached the end of the street, the bench was exactly as he had left it. The morning light revealed the details of its neglect even more starkly. The moss seemed greener, the spider webs in the corners glistened with tiny drops of dew. He placed the canvas box on the ground beside the bench. He opened it and took out the work gloves, pulling them on slowly. The leather molded to his hands. The first step was a surface cleaning. He took the cloth bag and began to clear away the dry leaves, small twigs and dust that had gathered on the seat and backrest. His hands moved with a calm, methodic rhythm. The leaves made a dry, crisp sound as he gathered them. In a few minutes, most of the loose debris was inside the bag. The bench already looked a little different, as if it could breathe better. Now it was time for the harder work. He picked up the stiff-bristled brush. He started at one end of the backrest. He ran the brush over the gray wood. The sound was harsh, a steady scraping. A small cloud of dust and loose wood fibers rose into the air. He worked without rushing, following the grain of the wood. Slowly, the surface layer of grime and weathered wood began to come away. Underneath, a slightly lighter color began to appear, the true color of the wood that had been hidden for years.
He continued, section by section. His arm moved in a steady rhythm, back and forth. It was physical work, but repetitive and meditative. He wasn't thinking of anything in particular. His attention was focused on the sound of the brush, the feeling of the bristles scraping the surface, the gradual transformation before him. The green moss was more stubborn. It clung to the crevices and corners. He used the tip of the brush to pry it loose, piece by piece. The moss came away in small, damp tufts, revealing the dark, stained wood beneath. It had a strong smell of earth and rain. After cleaning the backrest, he moved to the seat. The loose slat shifted under the pressure of the brush, and he worked around it carefully. He cleaned each of the slats, one at a time. Dust gathered around the ground at the feet of the bench. The sun was beginning to climb higher in the sky, and its light was no longer so soft. It warmed his back as he worked. He paused, straightened up, and looked at his progress. Half the bench was now scrubbed clean. The difference was remarkable. The clean part looked lighter, more defined. The dirty part looked heavy and tired. He drank some water from a bottle he had brought and returned to his work. He cleaned the rest of the seat and then the armrests. Finally, he knelt on the ground and scrubbed the feet. This was the most damaged part, where the wood had been in constant contact with the moisture from the soil. The wood there was darker and softer in some spots. He cleaned it as best he could, removing the caked-on dirt and the most stubborn moss. When he finished, the entire bench was free of its surface layer of neglect. He ran his gloved hand over the surface. The wood was still rough, but now it was clean. It was a blank canvas, ready for the next steps. He gathered the dust and bits of moss from the ground with his hands and put them in the bag. He put the brush back in the box. He looked at the bench, now exposed under the morning light. It was bare, showing all its imperfections, its cracks and its stains. But it no longer looked forgotten. It looked as if someone cared about it again. The first step
and perhaps the most important one, was complete. The next day, he returned to the bench. This time, his toolbox was heavier. Inside, there was a screwdriver, a small hammer, and a few containers to hold small parts. The sun was a little higher now, and the light fell directly on the bench, which had dried completely since the previous day's cleaning. The clean wood now clearly showed the work that would be needed. His goal today was to disassemble the parts that needed repair. His attention focused first on the seat. The wooden slats were fastened to the iron frame with screws. He knelt to get a closer look. The screws were covered in rust. The brownish-orange color contrasted with the gray wood and the dark iron of the frame.
He picked up the screwdriver. He chose the first screw on the most damaged slat, the one that was half loose. He fitted the tip of the screwdriver into the screw's head and tried to turn it. It didn't move. The rust had fused it in place. He applied a little more force, steady and firm. There was a small groan of metal, and the screw began to yield, very slowly. He kept turning, feeling the resistance with every millimeter. Finally, the screw came loose, and he was able to unscrew it all the way. He placed it carefully in one of the containers. He repeated the process for the second screw on the same slat. This one was also stuck, but it came free with a little less effort. With both screws removed, the wooden slat was completely free. He took it in both hands and lifted it away. It was lighter than he expected. He examined it closely. A long crack ran almost from end to end. On one side, the wood was crumbling. This slat couldn't be saved. It would have to be replaced. He set it aside on the grass. He decided to remove all the slats from the seat, wanted to sand and treat them individually. It would be a more thorough job. One by one, with patience, he loosened the screws. Each one had its own resistance, its own story of years under the sun and rain. Some came out with relative ease. Others required more force and persistence. The sound of groaning metal was the only thing that broke the morning silence. As he removed the slats, he lined them up carefully on the grass, in the same order they had been on the bench. He wanted to keep the original order. When all the slats from the seat had been removed, the bench's frame was exposed. It was made of cast iron, with simple, elegant curves. The black paint was peeling in several places, revealing rust underneath, but the frame itself was solid and strong. He ran his hand over the cool metal. It had a gritty texture where the paint had flaked off. He decided the frame would also need attention, but that would be for later. The focus now was the wood. He looked at the slats lined up on the grass. There were 5 in total. 4 of them seemed to be in good condition, despite being worn by time. They just needed to be sanded and treated. The 5th was the cracked one, the one that would have to be remade. He picked up the broken slat and one of the good ones to use as a template. The other 3 could stay there for now. He would come back for them later. Carrying the 2 wooden slats, one in each hand, he began the walk back home. The good slat was solid and had a balanced weight. The broken one was lighter and felt fragile in his hands. As he walked, he thought about the next step, creating a new piece that was exactly like the old one, so it would fit perfectly with the set. The bench at the end of the street was now incomplete, an iron skeleton awaiting its wooden parts to return, renewed and strong. The process of disassembly was complete. Now the work of reconstruction would begin.
He entered his workshop with the 2 wooden slats. He placed them on the workbench, side by side. The light coming through the window illuminated the sawdust motes dancing in the air. The workshop was his sanctuary, a place of silence and concentration. Tools hung on the wall, organized by size and function. There was a comforting smell of wood, metal, and oil. First, he examined the good slat, the one that would serve as a template. He ran his fingers over its surface, feeling the rough texture and the small imperfections. He measured its length, width, and thickness with a tape measure. He jotted the measurements down on a small piece of paper with a carpenter's pencil. He checked the corners, which were slightly rounded by use and time. Then he went to the corner of the workshop where he kept his lumber. There were planks of various types and sizes leaning against the wall. He looked for a piece that had the same thickness and, if possible, the same grain of the original slats. He found a long, solid plank of oak. It was a remnant from an old project. It had the right color and density. He pulled it out and laid it on the workbench. The sound of the heavy wood settling on the bench was a dull, satisfying thud. With the tape measure and pencil, he transferred the measurements from the original slat to the new plank. He drew the lines with care, ensuring they were straight and precise. He checked twice. The carpenter's rule was clear: measure twice, cut once. When he was certain, he secured the plank to the workbench with 2 metal clamps so it wouldn't move during the cut. He picked up a handsaw. The metal blade gleamed in the light. He positioned the blade exactly on the line he had drawn. He took a deep breath and began to saw. The motion was rhythmic and steady, back and forth. The teeth of the saw began to bite the wood, creating a thin groove. The sound of the saw cutting through the wood was the only sound in the workshop. It was a clean, almost musical sound. Fine sawdust, with a fresh, sweet smell, began to fall to the floor, forming a small pile. He kept the cut straight, following the pencil line with total concentration. When the cut was nearly complete, he slowed down to prevent the wood from splintering at the end. The piece came free with a final, soft sound. He now had a new slat with the exact dimensions of the old ones, but with the sharp edges and rough surface of a fresh cut. The next step was sanding. He released the piece from the clamps and picked up a sheet of coarse grit sandpaper. He wrapped it around a small wooden block to get a firm and flat surface. He began to sand the new slat, always moving with the grain of the wood. The sound of the sandpaper on the wood was a continuous whisper. Fine dust rose into the air. He sanded the larger surfaces first, the top and bottom, until they were uniform. Then, more carefully, he sanded the sharp edges, rounding them slightly to match the original slat.
After the coarse sandpaper, he moved to a medium grit. The surface of the wood began to feel smoother to the touch. He ran his hand over it from time to time to feel the progress. The texture was changing, from rough to satin smooth. Finally, he used a fine grit paper for the final finish. The motion was lighter now. When he finished, the surface of the wood was incredibly smooth. The grain of the oak was now clearly visible, with its unique and beautiful patterns. He placed the new slat next to the old one. They were identical in size and shape, but worlds apart in their condition. One was old, gray, and fragile. The other was new, light, and strong. He felt a deep satisfaction. He had created with his own hands a piece that would replace what time had ruined. The bench was one step closer to being whole again. With the new slat ready, it was time to tend to all the wooden pieces. He went to get the other 3 slats he had left by the bench frame. He brought them to the workshop and lined them up on the workbench next to the new piece and the slat that served as a template. Now he had 5 slats before him, 4 original and 1 newly made. The sanding work he had done on the new piece now needed to be repeated on the old slats. They were worn, but the wood was still good and strong. He began the same process. First, the coarse sandpaper to remove the surface layer of gray, weathered wood. It was slower work than with the new wood because he needed to be careful not to remove too much material. As he sanded, the true color of the wood began to emerge. The gray gave way to a warm, rich shade of brown. It was as if he were stripping away the years, layer by layer. The smell of the old wood being sanded was different from the new. It was drier, with a hint of dust and history. He worked on each slat with the same attention, ensuring that all the surfaces became clean and uniform. The small splinters vanished, the rough edges were smoothed. After the coarse sandpaper, he used the medium and finally the fine. By the end of the process, all the slats had the same smoothness to the touch. The new piece now blended with the old ones, which looked rejuvenated. They were all ready for the final step of preparation: protection. He cleared all the sawdust from the workbench with a soft brush. Then he lined the surface with old newspapers. He laid the 5 slats on the newspapers with a small space between them. He went to a cabinet and took out a can of linseed oil. He opened it carefully. The scent of the oil filled the workshop. It was a natural smell of nuts and earth. He took a clean, soft cotton cloth. He folded it into a small pad. He dipped a corner of the cloth into the oil and then began to apply it to the first slat. The motion was circular and gentle. The wood, dry and porous after being sanded, drank in the oil immediately. The color transformed before his eyes. The light, warm brown became darker, deeper. The grain of the wood leapt into view with all its details and patterns. It seemed as if the wood was coming to life. He applied the oil to the entire surface of the slat, the top, the bottom, and the sides. Then he moved on to the next slat. The process was slow and repetitive. The only sound was the cloth gliding over the wood. He worked with a quiet concentration, appreciating the transformation he was causing. The new oak slat absorbed the oil in a slightly different way from the old ones, but the final color was very close. The difference was almost imperceptible. When all 5 slats were covered with a generous coat of oil, he stopped. The work was done for now. The oil needed time to penetrate the wood and dry. He looked at the slats, glimmering softly in the light from the window. They looked new, healthy, and strong. He left the slats to dry on the workbench. He cleaned his hands and the tools he had used. While the oil dried, he took the opportunity to do another small task. He took the old, rusty screws and set them aside. He went to a hardware box and chose 10 new stainless steel screws, the same size as the originals. They would not rust. They would hold the slats in place for many, many years. He placed the new screws in a small container, ready for assembly. The day's work in the workshop was coming to an end. Patience was now the main tool. 2 days passed. The oil on the wooden slats had time to dry completely. To the touch, the surface was no longer tacky, but smooth and satiny with a soft sheen. The wood was nourished and protected. The time had come to reassemble the bench. He carried the 5 slats carefully, leaving the workshop for the yard and then the street. The afternoon sun was warm but pleasant. The slats felt heavier, more substantial in his hands. He also carried his toolbox, which now held only a screwdriver and the small container of new, shining screws. The walk to the end of the street was filled with a sense of anticipation. When he arrived, the iron frame of the bench was waiting for him, bare and incomplete. He laid the slats on the grass beside the frame, in the correct order. The treated wood, with its rich, deep color, contrasted beautifully with the black iron and the green grass. Before beginning the assembly, he took a dry cloth and wiped down the iron frame, removing any dust or leaves that had fallen on it. Then he took the first slat, the one for the front of the seat. He positioned it over the supports, aligning the holes in the wood with the holes in the iron. It fit perfectly.
He took one of the new screws. The metal shined in the sun. He placed it in the first hole and started tightening it with his fingers. Then he used the screwdriver. The screw went into the wood and iron with ease, without the groaning of the old screws. The sound was clean and firm. He tightened it until it was secure, but without forcing it. He repeated the process with the second screw on the same slat. The first piece was now firmly in place. He continued, slat by slat. He would take the next piece, align it, and fasten it with 2 new screws. His work was methodical and precise. With each slat that was added, the bench looked more complete, closer to its original form. The new slat, the one he had made himself, was the fourth to be put in place. It fit without any trouble, as if it had always belonged there. Its color and texture blended so well with the others that it was hard to tell them apart. The work progressed smoothly and without interruption. The sound of the turning screwdriver, the small click as the screw tightened, the feel of the solid wood beneath his hands. Finally, the last slat was set in place, and the last 2 screws were tightened. The seat was complete. He stood up and took a step back to observe his work. The bench was whole again. The new and renewed wood shone under the afternoon sun. The lines of the bench were clean and straight. There were no more loose slats or gray, broken wood. It looked strong, stable, and inviting. He walked over and pushed on the bench with one hand. It didn't wobble. It was solid as a rock. He ran his hand across the entire surface of the seat. It was smooth, continuous, with no splinters. The heat of the sun had warmed the wood slightly. The transformation was complete. The physical work of restoration had come to an end. The bench at the end of the street was no longer a memory of something that was once useful. It was again a place of rest, a simple object, well made and ready to fulfill its purpose. He packed his tools in the box, feeling a deep calm and a quiet satisfaction. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was growing cooler. The work was finished, but he didn't go home right away. He wanted to stay there for a moment. He set his toolbox on the grass beside the bench and simply stood there looking at it. The restored bench seemed to belong in that spot more than ever. Its warm color complemented the green of the grass and the brown of the dirt path. It didn't look new in an artificial way. It looked well cared for, respected. It had the dignity of its age, but with a renewed strength. The long afternoon shadows stretched across the street, and the bench's shadow was now crisp and whole. After a few minutes of silent contemplation, he decided to do something no one had done in a long time. He sat down on the bench.
He did so slowly. He felt the weight of his body settle onto the solid wood. The surface was firm and smooth beneath him. There was no creak, no unsteady movement. The bench was secure. The backrest supported his back at a comfortable angle. It was a good bench. From there, seated, the perspective of the street was different. It was lower, slower. He saw his own house further up the street, its windows reflecting the evening light. He heard the neighborhood sounds beginning to quiet down at the end of the day. A closing door, the distant laughter of a child, a bark of a dog. They were familiar sounds, but from that position, they seemed clearer, more present. He remained seated, doing nothing, just breathing and observing. The bench wasn't just an object he had repaired. It was now a point of observation, a place to be present. The effort of the past few days, the cleaning, the disassembly, the cutting, the sanding, and the reassembly all culminated in this simple moment. The bench's purpose was being fulfilled. It was offering rest. He thought about the flow of the work, how each step was necessary, how patience had been more important than strength. The satisfaction he felt wasn't of pride, but of harmony, of seeing something broken and making it whole again, of having restored a small part of his world. An elderly neighbor, walking her small dog, passed him. She stopped for a moment, looked at the bench and then at him. A small smile formed on her face. "It looks very nice," she said, her voice soft. "I haven't sat there in years." He just nodded, smiling too. The woman continued on her way. Her simple observation was a quiet acknowledgement of the work he had done. The bench was no longer invisible. People were seeing it again. He sat there until the sun had completely disappeared behind the hills. The sky darkened to a deep blue. The first stars began to appear. The bench, once a symbol of neglect, was now a place of peace in the twilight. It was a place to simply be. The streetlights began to turn on one by one with a low hum, followed by a soft flare of light. The yellowish light from the nearest lamppost fell on the bench, creating a warm circle of light in the calm of the approaching night. The world had grown quieter. He decided it was time to go home. He stood up slowly, feeling his muscles a little tired of the day. He picked up his toolbox. Before turning to leave, he gave the bench one last look. Under the lamplight, the wood looked even richer and darker. His work was complete. The bench was there, solid and empty, waiting. It no longer needed him. His part in the bench's story was finished. Now the bench would belong to whoever passed by and needed a moment of pause. It belonged to the street, to the night, to the days to come. He began to walk slowly back home. The sound of his footsteps was the only sound on the now silent street. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The image of the restored bench resting peacefully under the light was etched in his mind. When he got home, he put his tools back in their proper places in the workshop. Each tool had served its purpose. He washed his hands, feeling the texture of the soap and the warmth of the water, the feeling of the day's work leaving his skin. From his kitchen window, he could see in the distance the small point of light at the end of the street where the bench sat. It was a small but constant presence, a small anchor of order and care in his small world. He sat down at his table in the quiet of his home. There was nothing more to be done that day. The task he had set for himself was complete. A feeling of deep, simple peace settled over him. The cycle was complete. The imbalance had been corrected. The bench at the end of the street was once again doing what benches do best, waiting in silence, offering a place to rest for anyone who might need it. And that was enough.